Well, we're going to move forward here to another situation in the region that has some bearing on this, but some bearing on many different issues, and that is the Iranian presidential election, the second round of which just concluded last Friday, I believe it was. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again to sort through all the implications of that by Mazda Majidi, who is an organizer with the Answer Coalition. Mazda, thank you so much for being back with us.
Hi, Eugene. Great to be here.
Well, great to have you. Sort of. Well, did we lose Mazda? Oh, there we go. Got you back. I don't know if this was a shock result or not a shock result in terms of the election. I guess there's different takes on that. But nonetheless, Mr. Pezeshkian, I believe it is, please correct my pronunciation there, has become the president. He's sort of said as being from the Reformist camp, but I guess maybe just give us a sense, Mazda, of who this gentleman is, what his political background is in that sense. Because I think you hear conservative, you hear Reformist, and it's thrown around in the media, but what does that really mean?
Sure. Let me give a little context because the last 6 to 7 weeks haven't really been good for the U.S. Israeli funded satellite channels. If you recall, all these mouthpieces after, May 23rd, when Raisi's helicopter crashed, the former president, there were predictions of people are going to be celebrating in the streets, and it's going to be the Islamic Republic is going to be destabilized. Then, sure enough, as it's articulated in the Constitution, the Islamic Republic held elections within 6 weeks. Actually, they did it within 5 weeks. And there was the first round of the presidential elections with 6 candidates. Of those 6, the 2 top vote getters, assuming that no one gets more than 50% in the first round, which was the case here, the 2 top vote getters went to a second round, which was immediately the following Friday. So, of course, people didn't celebrate in the street after Raisi's death. There were millions of people who basically participated in rallies and marches, honoring the memory of Raisi. And in the first round of the elections, there was a 40% participation. And so then the following Friday, there was about 50% participation. And the 2 main candidates that were the top vote getters in the first round were Masoud Pezeshkian and Jalili. And Pezeshkian won comfortably. It wasn't a landslide, but he won by about 3 million more than Jalili, and he was elected president. You're right, Eugene. It wasn't that much of a surprise, but given the way that the elections were portrayed in Iran, in that sense, the process went very smoothly. I want to say Pezeshkian, as you said, Eugene, is considered to be part of the Reformist camp. But at the same time, he is considered sort of a moderate centrist reformist. And Raisi was considered to be part of the principlist, meaning people who adhere to the principles of the Islamic Revolution. In the West media, they call them conservatives. And I don't think the term conservative is very accurate. But in any case, Raisi was a centrist principlist. So this is not going to be a major change from the previous one. The fact that a reformist got elected is not that much of a shock. In fact, most of the presidents elected the last few rounds have been from the reformist camp: Rafsanjani, Khatami, and Rouhani. So that's not a shock either. But anyway, right now, so he's been elected. He hasn't taken office yet. There's a caretaker government right now in charge. And for that reason, the Iran's financial markets have settled down, and there's been, quite a bit of stability there.
I think it's really interesting, by the way, that the presidential elections in Iran coincided with the U.S. presidential debate between Biden and Trump. And the U.S. media actually was at a disadvantage. It was harder for them to try to delegitimize, I guess, the Iranian elections when our elections so far before November are already a disaster. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting juxtaposition. But all that's to say, I think it was Anthony Blinken came out and basically said that it doesn't matter that a reformist won. The U.S. still doesn't care and doesn't think Iran's elections are fair. And will still treat Iran in the way that it does. But I do think it speaks to something in the sense that in Iran, just because the so-called reformist candidate won, that doesn't change Iran's relationship with the resistance axis. That is a pretty consistent trend, no matter basically who's president. Because, can you explain that? Can you explain why, I guess, Iran's support for the resistance axis, and actually its leadership in the resistance axis, I should say, won't be changed by a presidential election?
Rania, that is exactly right, and it's very important. I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, for one thing, Pezeshkian, shortly after being elected, actually very clearly stated that Iran's support for the resistant movements in Hamas and in Hezbollah and against the illegitimate state of Israel will not change. So he very specifically said that. But even if he had not said that, I mean, the political establishment and the institutions are pretty complicated. It's not a simple thing. The president doesn't make all the decisions. There's a parliament or majlis that makes the decisions. There's an expediency council. There's a council of guardians. And there's, of course, the supreme leader, Khamenei. So even if the president somehow wanted to end Iran's support for the people of Gaza or for the resistant movements in the region. Oh, by the way, he also mentioned the Houthis in Yemen will continue. Iran will continue to support them and all oppressed peoples and movements representing them. So even if Pezeshkian somehow wanted to end all of that, that would not. There's too many levers of power that would have prevented doing that. We have to keep in mind that the support of Iran for the Palestinian people has continued through several administrations, really since the time of the 1979 revolution. And it hasn't changed whether there's a reformist or a principlist as the president. Not only that, let me just add to that, is that a lot of the major decisions in terms of foreign policy are made at least under the supervision of the office of the Supreme Leader Khamenei. So there's no way, even though that was the last propaganda line that they could come up with, that, he's going to challenge the Islamic Republic or things like that. The reality is that this does not signify major changes. So for that reason, I guess the last thing, just today I ran into this line, which was pretty interesting, is that 50% of the population boycotted the elections. And, this is very interesting because, no country in the world gets 100%. In fact, 50% is about average for US presidential elections. And I had never heard it spun the other way around, with 50% having boycotted. But the fact is that the opposition, which, by the way, does exist and wanted to boycott the election, definitely wanted low numbers. But there were those who did not participate in the elections for that reason. But there's several others that, we can get to if we have time.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important question. And actually some people who boycotted the last presidential election I saw came off the fence and said vote for the current president now. But I actually wanted to speak to that, Mazda, because it's interesting to me because obviously there's an element of management to what happens in the Iranian elections. But the idea that there's no debate whatsoever, I thought was totally belied. This is just me speaking now, and looking at the presidential debates in this election. Now, of course, there's certain candidates, people think there should be more people in there, but some of the things that just stood out to me to just sort of speak to this. One was the issue of dress code, the dress code for women, and that all of the candidates actually said they were against any form of sort of compulsory activity on that front. They had different views on it, but I thought that was notable. Also, the issue of quote unquote filtering, or how the internet is managed and all those pieces. All the candidates saying they thought there should be a more open internet environment that's there. I saw Mr. Pezeshkian actually went and spoke to some college students who in many ways were very critical and very hostile, and had a very open exchange with them about what was going on in the country, especially corruption and how to address some of those issues, and calling on them to stay in the country, don't leave, and all these different pieces. So I just say all that to say that it seems like this sort of caricature that there's no debate whatsoever and that this is just a totally fake thing just didn't really ring true to me, because it seemed like both for the people voting and non-voting, the sort of issue debates were revolving around what average everyday people on the street feel needs to change in the country.
That's a good point. It is very true, of course, that of the, I think, 80 some people who registered to run for president, the Council of Guardians deemed 6 qualified to run. So with that, that's like the limits of who can get elected, and it's based on past performance, public service, adherence to the principles of the revolution, and all those things. Having said that, there's very lively debates. First of all, the debates, you don't watch them wondering who has the better performance or who gives the best one-liners. There's like intense debates about, substantive issues, about issues having to do with people's lives, about the economy, about, just like you said, Eugene, about the hijab and the head coverings, about relations with the West, about how to support the resistance movement in the region and so forth. It's very interesting, and it's a short period. It's pretty intense. But when there were 6 candidates, and later when there were 2, there were debates that were broadcast on TV and watched by probably the majority of the population. And even in the streets and in interviews, I will say this: the range of views and opinions expressed are far greater than what you see in the corporate US media, where you could flip channels 100 times and there's maybe a little tilt towards Biden or Trump or whatever, but the general premise, the general outlook is not significantly different. So yes, there's very lively debates in Iran, in the streets, in buses, at all times, but certainly before presidential elections.
Yeah, Ronnie, go ahead.
Oh, well, I didn't know if you were going to let me.
No, I thought you were going to say something, so I didn't want to cut you off there.
We both took a deep breath at the same time. Well, Mazda, I guess moving forward, as we approach potential second Trump presidency, I'm not suggesting that Biden is somehow amazing on Iran. Obviously, Trump ripped up the nuclear deal and Biden kept it that way. Biden has instituted even more sanctions on Iran since he took over the presidency. However, should Trump come back to office, which if there was an election held today, it seems he would, there is a concern he would reappoint people like Mike Pompeo, for example, who has this very extreme anti-Iran, like Christian nationalist view of, apocalyptic end times, rapture-ready stuff he wants to bring about. Then there's the John Bolton type characters. These people may come back into a Trump administration. So I guess my question is, obviously, regardless of who's president in the U.S. come next year, the tilt will still be anti-Iran. But is there a concern? Are you concerned? What might happen if these extremists come back? And I'm talking about the people who were the ones who created the situation where General Qasem Soleimani was murdered.
Yes, I am concerned, Rania, and the fact is that at least since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, Iranians have been concerned to some level. In fact, this has gone on for so long that people have been sort of desensitized, because for years and years now, for decades, bombing or invading Iran has been an, quote, option on the table. So for that reason, we cannot not take these things seriously. And it is very true that the Trump administration and people like Bolton and Pompeo and others are more hawkish on Iran, even compared to Democrats. Having said that, there are some things that have changed the reality on the ground. Before I go into that, let me just say this. In fact, part of the reason that Pezeshkian received support and won the elections was that he was promoting in the debates finding ways to reach agreements with the West in hopes that the sanctions will end. Having said that, like if Rania, if Trump gets elected, there's no possibility of an agreement being reached. So it doesn't really matter who's the president of Iran and what concessions they're willing to make. But when I say some realities on the ground have changed, is that we're kind of seeing that in a different setting with Netanyahu. No matter how hawkish Netanyahu and Ben Gvir and the rest of his cabinet are, the reality on the ground limits how much the IDF, the Israeli military, can do. I mean, they can talk tough, but after nearly a year now, they haven't really done an all-out invasion of Gaza because they know their limits and the abilities of the resistance. Similarly, after the exchange of fire between Iran and Israel, of course, following the assassination of Iranian generals in Syria, what has happened is that Iran now sees itself in a position where it's not just a matter of Israel deciding to eliminate Iran or even the US. I'm not suggesting that Iran's military is a match for the US military, but an invasion of Iran by the US would be extremely costly, probably tens of times of what it was for Iraq. So the likes of Bolton and Pompeo and whatever other characters are in the future administration, if Trump gets elected, they can talk tough and they will certainly not loosen up the sanctions, and they may add to them. But again, I don't think anyone in Tehran is overly worried about a direct attack by the US. And to add to that, Iran has deeply extended its relationships with China, economic and otherwise, which has in part, softened the blow of the sanctions, particularly with the ability to sell oil to China at high numbers, over 1 million barrels a day.
Well, Mazda, as always, we really appreciate having you here to sort through all this. Mazda Majidi, you are an organizer with the Answer Coalition, among many other superlatives I could add. Thank you so much, as always, for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Great job, you guys. Thank you.